you mentioned justice. It seems to me, and according to Christopher Caldwell and others, Ryan Williams has been very good, and Tom and all have been very good at putting this out there. There is a competing sense of justice in the United States currently. One where it's very clear between the woke and the non woke, basically. Um, let's put that aside. Competing notions of justice, well established by the Caldwell book, Age of Entitlement. I highly recommend everybody read it. Watch my podcast with Chris. That was awesome. I think I called him sir the whole time too. Then I want to reference Vindicating the Founders. In Vindicating the Founders, I believe you made the argument, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when the northern states were considering whether or not to join with the southern states, in spite of the existence of slavery, you argued, I believe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was a moral obligation for the northern states to form a union with the southern states to prevent the existence of a nation formed solely around the idea of slavery that would promote slavery and come up with its own moral arguments for it, as was seen especially later into the 30s and 40s with 1800s. And that there was an obligation for the northern states, even though they thought that the southern states, or that slavery in and of itself was an abhorrent institution, that there was an obligation for those two groups to come together to form a country, so that over time, based on natural rights, that it would work itself out, which I believe it did. How does that relate today to competing notions of justice and the call from some, Claremonters included, for a national divorce, polarization, separation, something? Is there a link between this obligation that folks had in the founding time to create a country with the southern states in order to work out their misapplied notions of justice and rightness and wrongness? Is there a corollary or a relationship today when we consider whether or not to split from people that have a competing notion of justice here in the United States as well?
Well, I'd say go back to that John Jay passage again that we've been talking about in Federalist 2. Jay says we're a people who have the same religion, the same ancestry, the same customs, the same morals, same political principles. He said that knowing that the South was different in regard to slavery. He understood that whatever he thought of slavery, and he was a very strong personal opponent of slavery, we have more in common with the South than we have not in common with the South. Slavery is not as big as a thing as some of these other factors would have been had they been different. And so, yeah, but I think also you got to remember too that the biggest topic on their minds was foreign policy at the time of the Constitution. That is, what is going to happen if we split up into 2 or 3 or 4 confederacies, which is what people today, conservatives today, are sometimes proposing. Oh, well, we could just have different countries, different confederacies. People at the time of the founding, and that in the first 8 Federalist Papers, that's discussed and dismissed on the grounds that would put the whole country in danger, both North and South, because then you're going to get the European powers coming over here and poking around and making sides with one against the other, which is exactly what happens anywhere in the world where you have 2 states nearby each other and some third state far away that's powerful. They're going to come in and intervene and manipulate. And they thought the survival of the nation was at stake in regard to the Constitution. That was the fundamental problem, the immediate problem. Yes, the other thing was, of course, we have so much in common. We can definitely manage our differences over slavery over time. That was important too. But I think people forget that. Who's going to get the ports? Let's say we split up today. Who's going to get the seaports? That was we fought multiple We fought the Mexican War partly over that. Who's going to get the West Coast? Was it going to be British, as the British were kind of poking around on the West Coast, or us? You know, people forget real politics. Like we're so spoiled at being at kind of peace ever since World War II, largely at peace. We forget, countries can live and die uh, by splitting like that. By being able to be exploited. It's the British tried to do in the Civil War. The British loved the Civil War. Oh, that's good. Let's side with the South. And then they were writing these pietistic letters to Lincoln, telling him, "Oh, we're for the cause of peace. We'd like to propose that we be the intermediaries, just like the U.S. today goes around the world, supposedly doing favors for everybody by being intermediaries." Oh yeah, the British wanted to be intermediaries. So in other words, to keep the North and the South apart and make the U.S. as a whole weaker. That's crucial. And I'd say, as a second objection, and I've talked to Mike Anton about this. I don't know, I can't convince him, but these supposedly blue states and red states are a lot more purple than everybody likes to admit. They're actually not very different from one another if you get into it. You look at the actual policies followed by individual states with regard to, I don't care, education, criminal law, COVID response. There's a lot of differences, but they tend to be shades of differences. And you get a case like DeSantis in Florida. He was bad too at first. He went along with the consensus. Eventually figured it out that it wasn't a big threat. But what people forget how similar. Michigan had 2/3 majorities of Republicans in the state legislature, and a Republican governor as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, and they didn't do anything to fix the state. There's no difference between the way they govern and the way Whitmer governs. This is crazy. People expect too much from politics. It's the changes we need to have in our country are going to have to happen everywhere. But red states as well as blue states, and it's going to have to come from whatever the population is within each state that still has some strong attachment to the older American way of life. Because let's face it, that's how Trump got elected. He appealed to a broad majority of people who still were very sympathetic to the older American way of life, and who didn't like the direction the modern state was taking under the conditions that we are living in now.
Indeed. I was going to jump to another question, but since you mentioned something, I want to bring it up. Connection to the older way of American life. To what extent is that older way of American life connected to ancient philosophy? And how can we look back to Aristotle, for example, as a guide for living today? Is there value in examining ethics from Aristotle's perspective, reading the book, applying it in your life? Is there a connection between the ancient philosophy as such, the American founding as it was, and then where we are today? And should there be? Is there? Do we need to reconnect them? Do we let it go? What do you think?
Yeah, this was of course one of the topics that I heard about in grad school, and I'm still hearing about. It's an important topic. Who's right, ancients or moderns, and who gives you the best basis for political life? It's a good question, and I'd say first of all, the what we call moderns. That's a big group. That's lots of different people with different views. If you're looking at modern political thinkers like the kinds that the founders appealed to, the kind that they respected, people like Locke or Algernon Sidney, Montesquieu in France, Bourle-Marquis, Vattel, a Swiss thinker. I mean, they were very eclectic William Paley, a British thinker who was writing in the 1780s. There were many people the founders looked to, all of them modern, who who didn't really see themselves as being hostile to the best insights of the classics. That's, again, it's reading. I'm about to teach a course on Locke next semester, and Locke goes out of his way to talk about how much he respects the way in which the pre-modern tradition thought about and reflected upon the question of natural law and natural right. Yes, there's a modern difference, to be sure, but it's not as drastic as people make out. The reason why is, I'd say that there is the modern turn that takes place definitely with Machiavelli, which is government needs to stop trying to save people's souls. That, I think, was thought to be a necessary response to the excesses of Christian politics in both the Middle Ages as well as in the early modern period. You see that in people like Hobbes and Locke and others. They're saying if Christians are going to take over, and if they're going to impose upon you their view of salvation, you can't have any kind of decent political life. Or if you can, it's going to be a struggle. And that, in that respect, the moderns did disagree with the classics. The classics were more friendly towards religion and politics being united. But on the other hand, the religious teaching that was prevailed in the ancient world was more friendly towards the rule of law and whatever the constitution was of the particular community that it was involved with.